Hi, everyone. I'm Noam Siegel. Welcome to this Genway Academy webinar. I have partnered with Genway to bring AI research to the masses and whoever's interested in it. I am very, very excited about, curious about AI tools in the context of research and in general. And so really happy to be doing these webinars and to be answering questions about how this whole thing works and how we should think about it. If you joined live, thanks for spending some of your evening with me. I really appreciate it. And if you're watching the recording of this, cool. Next time, join live. I'd love to hear your questions, but whatever works for you. Today's topic is, well, the research topic was the TikTok ban. The TikTok ban happened. The TikTok ban was reversed by executive order by now President Trump. And so TikTok is working right now for US users. I don't know until when. Maybe the ban will happen again. But really, the topics for today are based on questions that we got from you. So I'm going to share those. Until then, in just a second, live. I would love to hear from you why you joined today, what you're most excited about, and any questions that you have. And feel free to add questions as we go through the session. So I will, in like 2 seconds, talk about Genway itself in case anyone here doesn't know it. But mostly, I'm going to talk about the research topic, a few insights that I got about TikTok in case it interests you. But I really want to spend most of the time talking about your questions, not yours, literally those who are necessarily watching, but questions that came through LinkedIn and other channels to me and to the Genway team about AI research. And those questions were on strategically combining AI capabilities with human expertise. How do you do that? What are the optimal ways to leverage AI in different stages? What's AI's role in stakeholder alignment and requirements gathering? And what's a practical framework for providing AI with the proper context to maximize results? I'm going to answer most, if not all, of these questions by simply showing you, or at least telling you, how I work with Genway and as a researcher and research manager in general. And again, if any of my responses aren't helpful enough, I will stay as late as you need to answer all of your questions. All righty. And thank you, by the way, for those of you who've already added your question. About Genway, in just a few words, Genway is an AI research tool that gives you the power of an AI agent to do whatever interviews you need to do, but specifically what Genway calls contextual interviews, which is just in-depth interviews about any topic you would like, or usability studies where you can share a Figma prototype with people and get their thoughts on it and have them try it out and see where it goes. But those are the two types of studies you can conduct on Genway right now. Of course, in the future, other things might pop up, but this is an interviewing research tool. The research topic that I was interested in was the TikTok ban. There were so many discussions online about free speech, national security implications, all of these different things. I wanted to learn more by asking a bunch of people, more than I could ask by myself, about this topic. So I wanted to understand sentiment towards this, what was a potential ban, turned into an actual ban, and then was reversed in the United States, and focus on free speech, national security, and tech regulation, and look into people's views on privacy, security, free speech, and how to balance all of those. Ended up talking to a sizable sample of 125 people in total. I had 87% engagement, which means 87% of those people completed the entire interview or even extended it. Some people didn't complete the entire interview. The average length of an interview was 12 minutes, which was enough for me. And 6% extended their interview by choice and decided to stick around with Genway for longer to answer my questions. I want to show you a few slides. The first was around just top concerns that came up in these interviews. these are the top 5 concerns. There were there was a lot around data privacy and corporate accountability. I think people feel like corporations in general are not being held accountable for our privacy, and that seems to bother people about not just TikTok but other platforms as well. There were fierce debates and a lack of agreement around whether TikTok is, the public square and whether free speech rights and, in particular, the First Amendment apply to a platform like TikTok or not. There was a lot talks about the loss of a global perspective by getting rid of TikTok and echo chambers. Apparently, this kind of surprises me, but TikTok is viewed as less of a bubble than Instagram or other American platforms. There was a lot of talk around government overreach because of economic and other interests. You might have seen that a bunch of Congress people, senators, and other decision makers are invested in Meta stock or have been lobbied by all sorts of companies. And so people feel like this ban is all about the wrong interests and bad motivations. And then there was a surprising amount of chatter around youth safety, mental health impact, and the fact that these platforms aren't properly age gated and that there's a lot of trust and safety issues within these platforms, which I can certainly appreciate as someone who used to lead the research on that topic at Twitter, now X. Those were some top concerns. There were also a few other intriguing insights that I wanted to share with you before I jump into the big AI questions. Um, so the first insight, which was interesting to me, was around the fact that you can't regulate what you don't understand. And many of the participants expressed deep skepticism about policymakers' understanding of technology and social media, suggesting that the fact that they have zero technical knowledge about how TikTok works leads to misguided regulations like the potential ban. And I think there's all sorts of takeaways from that around making more informed decision making and transparency in tech regulation and all that sort of stuff, rather than what people consider stifling innovation or free speech. The second insight was around how craft and user experience matter. And interestingly, people feel like the TikTok ban would negatively affect their experience because they feel like TikTok has unique features, including the algorithm itself, or as some people on TikTok called it, their Chinese spy friend, and the ease of use of TikTok compared to other platforms. It just feels like, from people's perspective, TikTok's user experience is not that easily replicated, even if you would think that, Instagram Reels or other such products aren't that different. Well, people beg to differ, and they seem to have missed TikTok or been worried about missing TikTok if it went away. And then a significant number of interviewees expressed concern about the negative economic impacts that would happen because of a TikTok ban, especially on content creators. It turns out that TikTok has a real role in generating real income and reach that other platforms don't. And one thing that lots of people noted is that on TikTok, a lot of creators have way more followers than on Instagram and other platforms. One person is asking, what were the demographics of the people who answered this? I maybe should have included that, but again, I didn't want the focus of today to be necessarily the insights themselves, but rather how I did this research. And to answer these questions about AI research, I'll say that the demographics broadly were people between the ages of 18 and 55 who live in the United States and use social media, not just TikTok, but social media in general. I think I did, flag that they do need to be TikTok users to answer this, because I don't want people sharing perspectives about TikTok if they don't know anything about TikTok. But that was basically it in terms of demographics. So TikTok and other social media users from fairly young ages of 18 to 55 who live in the US and would therefore be affected by a US ban. Obviously, if you live elsewhere, you will not be affected by this ban. Sure, but I didn't. All right. So those are some insights, some takeaways. If you're very curious about everything that came out of this research, feel free to email me afterwards or message me on LinkedIn. And of course, I'd be very, very happy to share whatever you like. I'm very transparent. My email is noamseg, Noamseg @gmail.com. And you can also find me at noam@genway.ai. I have another attendee who's asking, quick question about the analysis. Was it auto-generated by Genway? And that's actually a great segue into the deep questions about AI that we received, and for me to explain how I work with AI. So the first question is, how can we strategically combine AI capabilities with human expertise to enhance our research methodology? And a similar question we got, so I bundled them together, is what are the optimal ways to leverage AI throughout different research phases? So hopefully you can see this Genway screen. We've jumped into Genway now. And I'm going to answer this question by talking about 4 stages of execution, 4 stages or 4 research phases that I imagine you all think the same about how research is, which is the research planning, the research execution, the research analysis, and then the research socialization. So writing about the research or presenting about the research, whatever it might be. So let's start with research planning. How do I get to the right level of context? How do I get to the right questions? What do I do here? So I'll talk about this again, maybe in the third deep dive. But when I got started with this project, I was like, okay, there's a ton of information about the TikTok ban and all of that stuff. So I wanted to leverage ChatGPT. Please tell me if you can't see the entire window, if you can only see the tab. I'm hoping you can see the entire window. So I went to ChatGPT, my friend, and asked it to please summarize all of the articles and other writings on the topic of the upcoming potential TikTok ban. And I got a bunch of stuff around legislative actions, legal proceedings, potential outcomes, implications, reactions, next steps, links to all of that stuff, everything I needed. From there, when it comes to how I use AI, at least, I went to Genway GPT. Genway GPT is a custom GPT built by Genway. You can give it whatever context you want to give it. So, for example, I can copy paste this response from ChatGPT, paste it into Genway GPT, and go for it. And what Genway GPT will do is it'll generate answers to the 5 questions that are included in the Craft with AI experience on Genway itself. So, so it's asking me like how I want to frame the stuff and if the initial framing works for me. Let's jump back into Genway to explain what's going on here. Because I'm not going to start framing things right now, but for the purposes of the demonstration, essentially what Genway GPT will eventually give me once I kind of tweak it and do what I need to do is answers to these 5 questions. What's your project's objective? What topics will we be covering? What would you consider a successful project's outcome? Who will be interviewing in this project? And do you have any general project guidelines? And I can show you, if I go back to the dashboard and I go to the actual study and I click on edit project, then you can see in the project details the responses to each of those questions. So for example, I worked with Genway GPT to craft this objective that I want to explore public sentiment about the potential TikTok ban, et cetera, et cetera. I had background information that I got through ChatGPT. I had prior research. I had existing insight. I had a research gap. So basically, the way I work, at least when it comes to leveraging AI, is I get all of my context through ChatGPT. I port it over to Genway GPT. I change and adjust and go deeper where I want to before copy pasting those responses into Genway itself. And then my project is good to go. Then, if we move on to the execution phase, well, it's sort of like still pre execution. But here on the right hand side, you can see that I can take a demo as the researcher of the interview and I can see if the interview is going the way I want. I have, I believe, a couple of past demos here. And for each of those demos, I can check out the entire transcript of the demo and read exactly what happened. And then based on how the demo goes, I can decide to change things in my Crashed with AI research plan to ensure that the interviews cover all of the research questions I want to cover, whatever it might be. Okay, so I've planned my research, I've executed my research. Now I want to analyze my research and understand what went down. I have a very particular workflow with Genway, but to each their own. My workflow is I start with the project's insights within Genway. And Project Insights gives me essentially two things. The first is a summary of the projects and what went down in the interviews. And the second thing is the top 10 ish, it can be more in some cases, insights that came out of these interviews, according to Genway. For example, this concern around impacts on content creators and businesses. Now, for me, in some cases, these top insights make complete sense. They're a very good fit with my objectives. In other cases, perhaps not as much. And so I want to play around with things a little bit. To assess that, I would usually go and look at some of the interview responses, understand where these insights are coming from, open a few of the interviews, look at the interview themselves, do a bit of a sanity check to make sure that these insights are as accurate as possible and reflecting what happened in the interview. Haven't really had major problems with that so far. And then once I do that, I can start diving in deeper. The second stage in my analysis is where I use theme analysis. In theme analysis, Genway is taking the questions it's asked in interviews and it's generating sub themes and subtopics within a theme. So, for example, when it comes to the main reasons for supporting or not supporting the TikTok ban, we can see that alternative platforms came up, free speech came up, data privacy came up, censorship came up. I can click into each of these topics. I can read all of the different quotes that came out of these interviews on those topics. And I can start coming up with my own take on which of these themes most relevant, most in line with my research questions, all of that good stuff. So that's that. This is where the sort of AI human collaboration and combination of AI capability and human expertise comes into play. I can also add my own themes. If I feel like a theme is missing or misrepresented by the system, I can add my own themes. I just click here. I put in a question that would represent this theme, and the system can generate it for me. Some of these themes were generated by me. I simply can't show this process right now because it would take too much time to come up with the theme that even makes sense. And then the system has to analyze the data, and it does take a few minutes for all of that to happen. But some of these themes are mine. And once I've gotten through all of that, you can go even deeper and look at tags. I didn't do that in this case. So these tags are like very generic tags for product teams around growth, UX research, product, are it like all of that sort of stuff. It's really irrelevant for this project. But if you want to, you can generate both tag groups and tags, and the system will run not just keyword search, but a semantic search for those tags in all of the conversations. So that's around research, analysis, and synthesis. And then the last thing, which in my opinion is incredible, if you have access to it, is writing up. I've used both ChatGPT and Claude to do this. I love Claude, Anthropic's product. I think Claude is an incredible partner for writing. Genway cannot help you with this as much. Obviously, as you saw, it can give you summaries, it can give you insights, it can give you themes. But ultimately, I do like to port over all of those things into a Google Doc or a Microsoft Word or whatever you use, and then use a tool like Claude to summarize my work. For those of you who will watch this, maybe we'll add to the show notes some of my favorite prompts for Claude on how to improve your writing. One example of how I've used Claude, which is very interesting, is it can help you adjust your narrative for people in different roles. You can present your research in a certain way to a PM versus a designer versus an engineer, or one team versus another. And it can sort of help you reword your work to do that. That's a very interesting use case, but there's a bunch of them. I hope that covers to some extent how I at least combine the AI capabilities that exist here with my particular expertise and the optimal ways to leverage AI throughout all of the research. Moving on to the second question, what's AI's role in stakeholder alignment and requirements gathering? So this is something that I can't show you because I'm on my personal computer and not my work computer. I'm the head of UX research at Zapier, and the technique I'm about to describe to you is what I use at Zapier, but I obviously can't show you proprietary research and my Zapier Notion, etc. If you want deeper explanations into how I do this or what I mean by what I'm about to say, let me know. But when it comes to AI's role in stakeholder alignment and requirements gathering, first of all, I use an AI note taker for all of my meetings. My choice of tool, because it's approved, among other things, is called Time OS. But there are a bunch of other tools called, some of them that I like are Granola, it's incredible, Fathom, there's a bunch of them right now. I'm not affiliated with any of them. Again, I use TimeOS because it's approved at Zapier. Now, my AI notes from my meetings with my stakeholders go into Notion. Automatically, TimeOS is integrated with Notion. Notion is my second brain, if you are familiar with that term. And then once I have them in Notion, I can very easily use Notion's own AI or ChatGPT Enterprise to summarize a subset of those conversations. And once I've summarized the conversations that are relevant to a particular research project, the next stage is to use Zapier, and I can automatically Slack all of those stakeholders that I was looking at and summarizing using AI, the conversations with them. I can automatically Slack those stakeholders with what came out of that summary and my research plan. So basically, once I add that summary to my spreadsheet, my roadmap of work that the team is doing, I have an automation up that will Slack my stakeholders. It will, create either a private channel or just a DM with a bunch of people. It'll Slack them information. It will Slack them the document. They can review it in whatever time I'm giving them and get back to me with feedback. And once they get back to me with their feedback, I can then take that and port it over into Genway and then run my interviews through Genway. Most of our projects at Zapier are run by humans, and I imagine it'll be like that for a while to come. But being a company that's focused on AI and automation, we use all sorts of AI tools. We do not currently use Genway at Zapier, but hypothetically, if we were to use a tool like Genway, you can port those stakeholder summaries and their feedback into a tool like this and go forth with your research. AI helps me a lot with stakeholder alignment, is the summary of that. I'm taking notes with AI. I'm summarizing those notes with AI. I'm using automation in combination with AI to communicate with my stakeholders faster and automatically. And then I take their feedback and put it into AI systems like Genway and run my research. So that's the answer to the second question. The third question was, what's a practical framework for providing AI with the proper context to maximize results? And my answer to that is there isn't one framework to rule them all. And I think the framework depends on the tool you use. The team at Genway, which is an incredible team, put a lot of thought into this. And that's when they created this craft with AI experience. So if I go back all the way to my projects and I do create a project and I call it test something or other, I am taken into this craft with AI experience. And this is the framework that Genway uses. But again, it doesn't fit with every tool. It really depends. So the framework is basically, look, you have to tell me what's your objective, what topics you want to cover, what would you consider a success, and who will you be interviewing? And within each of those questions, there are sub-questions. For example, in the objective, the system wants to know what's the background information, what's the prior research, what are the existing insights, what's the research gap, or when it comes to topics, the system wants to know what assumptions are you making? What new knowledge are you seeking? What research questions do you have? And it's only once you answer those questions that the system feels, so to speak, that it has enough context. Ultimately, I do think it makes sense to me that for each AI system, you have to work with the system to understand sort of what it needs. Some AI research systems are better at walking you through a clear process to give them what they need. Some systems aren't as good at that. Some systems give you more control. Some systems give you less. So it really depends. But this framework should feel very familiar to anyone watching this, especially if you're a researcher, because it's basically the sort of stuff we would put in a research plan anyway. And so there's no big news here of things that these AI systems need and you wouldn't do anyway if you were conducting the research yourself. So that is the practical framework for providing AI with the proper context. Um, we have until 9:15 Eastern, which is in about 12 minutes. Again, I'm happy to stay longer if you'd like. I would love to hear as many of your questions as possible. Again, just as a reminder, would love to hear why you joined, what you're most excited to learn, and any questions you have. A few questions that came up, and I hope I answered, but let me know. How do you leverage AI in the research process? I hope I clarified that both within Genway and out of it. I'm leveraging AI and Genway specifically pretty much in every stage of the process. When the project is AI led, which is by far not all projects, but when it is AI led, I'm working with AI to bring in all of the context, to craft the project, to test the project, to execute the projects. I'm using the AI synthesis and analysis capabilities and working with it. And then I'm leveraging AI to improve my writing as well, because there's a lot to improve, even though I've put a lot of effort into becoming a pretty good writer and communicator. So that's the answer to that. We had a question about demographics in the study itself. We also had a question around, is this analysis just auto-generated by Genway or not? As you saw, yes, a system like Genway does auto-generate an analysis for you and synthesizes the information, you know, 10, 15, 20 interviews, which I think is a good thing to go beyond that, it becomes increasingly difficult for a human to synthesize, analyze, and synthesize all of those qualitative data and that, deep, deep research. So I think every AI system sort of has to give you some of that, or how would you ever get along? So those are the questions I'm seeing right now. Um, Gonna call on a few people that I can see here. Denise, good to see you. Any big question? I'd love for you to add. Matthew, Derby, Wandy, bunch of people in here. Feel free to add your questions right now so I can get to them. Gonna give you a second. Okay, so Serby's going first. How long did this project take with Genway? So I don't recall exactly, but like approximately 3 days, I want to say. I set up my planning and sample within perhaps an hour. The interviews ran for approximately a day. And then I took another day-ish to look at the result, come up with my own analyses, add to Genway's analysis, and then I put together this deck fairly quickly. So yeah, I mean, I guess it was 3 days, but obviously this can take even less than that. It just depends on what your objectives are, what your goals are, how things work at the company where you work. There's all sorts of variables that come into play, but you can absolutely finish a project end to end in days, if not a day, if not hypothetically hours, if you have the time to get some stuff done. It just depends on the project. Thanks for that question. Anyone else? Please feel free. I'd love to hear your questions. Getting another question here. What aspects of these AI tools do you have the least trust in? What are they not doing well? It's a great question. I'll say two things. I think the first thing I'll say is that across the entire process of research, I'm still seeing that there's some magic in human capability. And especially when you work with a bunch of fairly senior researchers who have seen a lot and done a lot, there is definitely added value there compared to what a system like Genway can produce by itself. Whether it comes to research questions and topics and everything to do with planning. Even then, I think that sometimes, a good researcher will have those brilliant follow-ups that maybe the system won't think of because it can be too rigid at times. And then, of course, in the analysis and synthesis stages, sometimes the system will miss out on what I would consider important themes, or sometimes it will misunderstand what you care about and not really get to the insight you're looking for. And AI systems have hallucinations, have bugs, they require a certain style and certain language to collaborate with people. So I think there's all sorts of issues. But what I'll also say, after saying all of that, is that when it comes to AI systems, I say this a lot, I am much more focused on the vector than the state. And by that, I mean that, AI systems are imperfect and there's a lot more to do. No doubt about that. Whether it be Genway or any other AI system I'm using, then I'm sure those of you who are watching are doing the same. But I'm not focused on the state of AI, which is on the one hand incredible and on the other hand, all sorts of issues. I'm focused on the vector. I'm focused on the fact that these systems are evolving at an astonishing pace. And what Genway looks like today and in 6 months, what ChatGPT looks like today and in 6 months, Cursor in the coding space, or Lovable or Bolt or Replit in the coding space, all of these AI native tools in whatever area, the evolution is happening at an exponential rate. So whatever weaknesses or bits and pieces of, lacking trust, wherever those things exist, I imagine that in a few months, things will look very different and that things will be quite a bit better than they are now. So I'm not sure there's a particular aspect that I have the least trust in. I still double check everything. I still dive into the data. I still give my feedback to the system. I'm always trying to improve my prompts to make sure these systems are as accurate as possible. And, Genway is very responsive to that and does what it needs to do to improve. I hope that answers the question. I think it's a great question. And I think our involvement is incredibly important. And the quality of your input to a system like Genway counts for a lot. It counts for a lot. If you have any questions that came up from this, feel free to LinkedIn message me or email me at noam@genway.ai, or my personal email, noamseg, noamseg @gmail.com. If you want to try out Genway and see what it's about and run your own research, you can go to genway.ai, and there's a try it free button, and you can put in a couple of details and just go ahead. I think you even get some credits to recruit a couple of people and kind of see how it goes. And if you have, again, any questions, anything you want to know, feel free to get in touch. Thank you for saying thank you. For those of you who just said thank you, I'm really glad to be doing this. I will be doing this every other week or so. So tune in for more Genway Academies and also other stuff coming from me when it comes to AI and research. Not going to ruin the surprise, but all sorts of things going on. Thank you for being here with me, for those of you who joined live. Really appreciate it. Have a evening, and I will see you soon, I hope. Cheers. Bye for now, everyone. Have a good evening, good night, or good day, depending on where you are. I appreciate you.